Welcome everyone. Welcome all the members of Stroke Support India. Thank you so much, Thomas sir, for being a part of this session and throwing light on aphasia. Generally, it's something which is silent, which is not visible, though physical disabilities or the problems one person suffers after stroke is visible. Aphasia is something which is invisible. And recently in the group, I read the article by other SLP stating that, some people don't want to continue with the therapy. So they leave it in middle, and they are encouraging a lot through their institute to continue with therapy. We are very eager to know your journey and how you were able to recover and achieve so much and guide a lot of people thereafter. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. And the beautiful dress I mentioned
thank
before.
You so much.
Yes,
thank you so
beautiful.
Much.
I'll wear either a tie or I'll wear pearls, one or the other, next time we meet.
Then I have to come back in the same way. If you will come
there you
back
go.
in the same way.
There you go. Exactly.
Thank you.
Talk a little bit about pre-stroke, Thomas. What are you doing? What was your career like? What were your profession at that moment? Friends and family, a little bit.
Sure. Sure. That's a good question. All the questions I get typically have the beginning, middle, and end of what I was before my stroke and what I am now, and how those two are connected. Because it turns out, from my perspective anyway, that a lot of recovery after your stroke has an awful lot to do with who you were before your stroke. Because so much of the brain are habitually changed such that whatever your work was before your stroke, those habits you had made before that would be otherwise successful, that's how we use our habits for, after your stroke, those same habits are still there. And in my case, those habits basically made me continue to do what I did after, based on what I had done before. So the short story from before was, I went to the Naval Academy and joined the Navy. I was an engineer on a destroyer for 3 years, then converted to supply corps school and went into submarines. So I was in submarines and then a submarine tender, and then left the Navy and went into shipbuilding. I eventually became the director of mechanical engineering and design at a big shipyard here in Maine called the Bath Iron Works. I was there for several years, did a couple other jobs along the way, and then started Career Prospects. I loved sailing ships. I loved building ships. And then eventually I realized that what I was really doing was just building shipbuilders. I was actually building the people that worked for me to become better at what they did. And that's when I went into Career Prospects and finally into education. So I got a research PhD late in life. I got my PhD from the Heller School when I was 54. And because I needed more tools working with people. And in particular, even back then, before my stroke, working with people with disabilities pursuing employment. So after I graduated, I was still looking for what that big research question would be. I went to Vassar for a semester, then went back to the Heller School for 5 more years there, still working on what I was going to work on, typically with people with disabilities. And that's when I had my stroke. So that sort of leads you, or at least it leads me to realize that all of my life had been decisions, habits along the way that led me to be who I would become. And that is a person who had stroke and aphasia. And that was the last tool I needed to then realize, of course, only after the stroke, that not a lot of people know about aphasia. Not a lot of people know about plasticity that capacity we all have, and how we learn based on how plasticity works. So that really put it all together for me. And that's what I do now. Started my company 7 years ago now, believe it or not. And now going around the world, helping people understand how we learn, and in particularly how we learn whether you have a stroke or not, because everybody who is learning something for the first time, a new language, a new job, a new experience, it involves plasticity. There's nothing you're doing that doesn't involve the neuro representation of what it is you are doing based on the neuro representation in the nerve world. So that's what I do now, and I'm excited about it. As my wife always says, we can't be excited about having a stroke. And I said, oh, I know that, but now I have it, so I have to do with what I have. So she always laughs and then leaves the room, because I continue to be excited, and I don't mean that at all. People with stroke and aphasia is something you would never want in your life. I wish I could save everybody from having it, but I can't do that either. So really all I can do, like all of you do, is really help them understand after it happens that there are lots of things you can do to help you get better, to the degree that all of us, everybody in this room, share a story. And part of that sharing is therapeutic, in terms of people begin to realize that they have a lot more tools than they might otherwise not have known. That's what I do. I'm wonderful that there's one person in your audience that we had actually met before in New Jersey a couple of years ago at one of my booths. That's pretty exciting.
It
Right?
is, and I was so happy I was able to make it. That was because I wasn't originally, and I'm like, oh man, he's terrific, and I was really feeling bad. And I've been trying to tie in with Stroke Support India, Hardeep sir and Shruti ji, and I'm just trying to connect with them. Where I won't take too much away, but Shruti ji is really amazing. She's an amazing caregiver for someone who's had a stroke, and she's so well tuned in, and she's just spreads all the positivity and the caregiving tips to them. And we've kind of begun like a communication training, like a support group. We just started it, but we're still in the turning the wheels of how to progress it. But she's really amazing. This group is wonderful, and I'm so glad they found you, or you found each other for this opportunity for other people to hear you.
Yeah, it's so true. Because there are obviously millions and millions, well, billions of humans, and then there's millions and millions who have stroke and aphasia. And it's still a very few number of people who, like, again, you in that room, who have come to realize that recovery from a stroke and aphasia uses the same tools that happens with people who want to learn anything.
That's right.
And so that you really have to understand the underlying foundation, which happens to be plasticity and how the brain actually works. So yes, it turns out that if we could, we would help educate the entire world. Often we get it through the keyhole of aphasia recovery, because that's what all of us do. That's what we do every day, is figure out how we can now speak and express what we couldn't express before. That just happens to be another new tool. Now we can educate other people around that world just about how the brain really does work, because just to know a little bit about it means you're going to know a lot about it if you know a little bit and start using that to
That's right.
to learning's effect.
That's right.
But nice to see you.
I must say your recovery is amazing, and you have taken this so sportively and positively to educate other people through your journey and your learnings. You're giving it to others. So I must say it's amazing. But how was it when you had a stroke? How was it in the family? Did they know that it was a stroke? I didn't know. Basically, let me tell you, I didn't know my husband had a stroke. So really we fumbled there because he had a history of convulsions. So I didn't know then that he had a stroke. He had convulsions, so I thought it was related to his previous history, and he went into deep sleep. So 1.5 hours after that, 90 minutes after that, his right side had collapsed and he was not able to speak. Then immediately I called my doctor and we rushed him to a hospital. So how was it on the day of your stroke, and who was there with you?
Yeah. How
Yeah.
long ago was how long ago was that?
Yeah, this was 4 years back.
4 years.
Yeah, 4 years.
Mhm. And doing well now?
Yes, he is able to speak small sentences in 2 languages. One is his mother tongue and one is English. He's also picking up English a little bit. But writing he is good in English. So this is how he has written on the board.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, he writes beautifully. Yeah, I want to know, like, how was it when you had a stroke, and how was your journey after that?
It's, to me, it's always interesting. So unfortunately, you hear me saying that. It's just always interesting. Because for the first several months after my stroke, well, I'll go back to when I was at the hospital. So I was at the hospital for 6 days. The stroke was on a Monday. My wife and I were walking and we were crossing the street, and she was ahead of me, and I stopped in the middle of the street, and the last conscious memory I had was looking at my shoes. That was it. That was it. That was it. Apparently, though, I was crawling, because, you know, you can have various levels of consciousness. So apparently my body was crawling because I was in the middle of the street, so it knew it was in trouble, but I consciously didn't know what was happening. So my wife finally turned around just to see where I was, and she came running back and she said, "Oh, you're having a stroke." And she dragged me because my body was still working, but my right side was not working. So she dragged me to a pharmacy, which happened to be right next door. I've been there in Boston and measured it. It's 310 feet to get to the pharmacy in the back. She dragged me there. Again, I had no idea. They called 911. They took me to the hospital and they did all the tests. Again, I was unaware, but I was ready to get that drug, TPA. I got it. I woke up with, like I say, with a vengeance, because I started screaming and beating myself on the left side in the Broca's area. So they had to strap me down because I was beating myself and screaming. And I had a dream of all that, but it was months later when I was able to express it to my wife. And she was there when it was happening. She said, "Well, that's what you were doing." She said, "We had no idea. You just woke up and started screaming and hurting yourself. So they had to strap me down." So that's how it all started at the very beginning. But the drug kept me from my body being permanently impaired, but my language, that drug doesn't help. So I didn't know that. So unfortunately, people with aphasia are unaware that they have these difficulties, right? Unaware of what they're aware of. So I didn't know, even though I had been told I couldn't read, write, or speak well, without the evidence, I had no idea. But I mentioned it before, it was my habit as an engineer to record myself. I always wanted to keep track of what I was doing. And I started my diary, which turned out to be a 500-page diary, but the first 200 pages were words that didn't make any sense, which you would go, "Wait a second, you mean you wrote, you can't write." Well, you can write, it doesn't have to make sense, you know. As a matter of fact, it's the activity themselves that is therapeutic, right? It is the activity that actually induces plasticity. So I started writing, and 11 months until I finally became aware that what I was writing didn't make any sense. But the interesting part of this was that I was writing using graphs, charts, and metaphorical pictures, images that do make a lot of sense. So if we had my slide up, you would say, oh, that's what Tom was thinking. You'll see the words make no sense, but you'll see this image of one thing or another, and you go, oh, that's what Tom was thinking. So as I say, it was by accident, because it was really driven by my own habits before my stroke, that I was motivated to do one thing or another. But I recorded with my diary. I took hundreds of pictures of the world around me because I couldn't read those signs, but I would show it to my wife and say, what is this? And she would say it out loud. And I say, I don't know what that is. And then I started recording myself with my phone. These things are very, very therapeutic tool. And I started what turned out to be 202 recordings over 2 years, and eventually had them transcribed. So now I could actually see what it was I was saying that didn't make sense, although I thought what I was doing did make sense. So yes, that's how it all happened, quite by accident, based on who I was before, really the habits I had before that allowed me to use those habits going forward without being aware that what I was doing was therapeutic.
Yes, I have been observing that in my husband too. What he was before, what he was working. He was a software engineer. He was a senior manager. So very fond of his job, extremely fond of his job. He is trying to pick up programming skills again. So he is learning on his own. So that's the great thing about him. He used to do that before, as you said, how we connect to a person, what that person was doing before stroke, and a person with aphasia and after stroke. So I'm trying to connect small things, like dots. So even he is fond of doing the same things he was doing before because he is able to pick it up faster. He is learning programming through tutorials. So small modules he tries to implement. Now time has come that I should learn some amount of programming so that I can help him. So still I am behind. So I have to pick up my pace so that he will go much more further.
So a new language.
New language, yes. New language, right? Yes.
Plasticity at work.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I have another slide, and again, we'll do this another time. I have a slide that is actually embedded video, and you actually get to see, it's a video of on the inside of a human, and you get to see, and maybe you've seen it before, various videos of when you are thinking, this is what thinking looks like. So you can see the nerves as they grow, connect, and you can see that on the video. So it really is converting thought into neuromatters because it goes from here to here to here to here to here and starts to do this, and you get to see it all. Yeah, and that's what happens when you learn a new language with you and your programming. There's, of course, a lot of us have nerves that are too far apart, so it takes a long time for them to finally make their way together. And that's what happens too when you've lost all those cells in between. Now it takes a longer time. You have to grow, a person with stroke and aphasia, depending on how severe, you have to grow, 1,000 miles of fiber, 1,000 miles of fiber inside here, just to make the journey from here to 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 here, right? It takes a long time because you have to build so much additional infrastructure, as it were, traffic infrastructure to get from one place to the other.
Sir, I want to know one thing. So what was the advice given in the hospital during your discharge? Did you take the help of any rehab services from the hospital, or were you in any rehab center? Did you come home? So what kind of aphasia was diagnosed at that point of time?
Well, there were several questions, so I'll sort of put it together as a little story. At discharge. At discharge, so when I was still there, I had been assessed by a speech therapist. But of course, people with stroke, while the brain is still rattled, I didn't know there was a person in front of me, never mind that it was a therapist, never mind that I'd been assessed as having aphasia. what they otherwise call Broca's aphasia or expressive aphasia. But I didn't know any of that. Actually, I was somewhat bothered by the fact that I was sitting in this, what I thought was a beautiful hotel. And since I could walk, and I didn't know that when I tried to say something, it didn't make sense. So I couldn't quote, I couldn't hear myself saying things. I just wanted to go home, not knowing that there was something wrong with me. So at discharge, and this is, I'll say this is unfortunately, at least I'll say in the United States, maybe it's not as broadly as I sadly think it does happen. When I was discharged from regular hospitals, and then you're going to move into a rehab facility, they will often, you'll go home unless you're really seriously in trouble. You'll go home, and in my case, for a month with no intervention, no therapy, no nothing. And then I'll go to a local rehab hospital as an outpatient. But in the month between, they gave me one piece of paper, and it had a list. It was literally one piece of paper. It had a list of all these brain diseases and disorders, and there was one line for aphasia, and it said aphasia, difficulty with reading, writing, and speaking. That was all I ever knew. Not that even I knew anything, but my wife and my family read that and said, "Oh, this thing, we don't know what this thing called aphasia is." And of course, they went looking on computers. Not that I knew that. It turns out that giving all that time by yourself with no information, I wrote another book for that purpose to help bridge the gap from what you might call conventional hospitals, where they know something about aphasia, but they don't really care about aphasia. They just want you to get out the door, get discharged and go into the rehab facility. Oh, everybody there knows about aphasia, but it's like a baton being passed from one runner to another. They just want to give you the baton, meaning me, the person with aphasia, get to the next person. So unfortunately, there can often be a gap between the conventional and rehab. So I wrote a book, and that's what this book is. This should be in the hand of everybody who has a stroke or aphasia. Obviously, you give it to the family, but with the family, everything you need, at least here in the United States, has all the information you need, including the 22 top aphasia organizations in our country that you can learn from. So that was the beginning of, now, of course, this is again, back then, I didn't know any of that. And it took years to not only get better, but use the fact that I was getting better and beginning to realize that the act of researching, looking, finding, writing, reading, practice was therapeutic. And then I realized it takes an awful lot from too many people to do what took me 4 years to figure this out. A large part of that could be if you give them more than just one piece of paper that says, "Oh yeah, aphasia, somebody else will take care of you, and you're on your own until somebody else helps you." So that's part of what I now do, but based on 4 years of work just to get to the point of beginning to understand. It shouldn't have to take that long. And if you go to the website, since I couldn't do it, my family has to, and they have other issues, at least give them the images, because this really starts with the images of, oh, that's what the brain looks like, as we just talked about, the metaphorical distance between one thing or another. You can see the image, and without even being able to express it, they can go, "Oh, I understand what that means between here versus this," coming together, building new bridges without knowing that there really are bridges up there that are being built. Yeah, I could, and I tell you another little story along those ways. Since I couldn't express, but as they say, as we all say, you lose your language, but not your intellect. And I was an engineer and I always thought that way. So on the inside, I kept thinking, I could see those words, but I can't say those words. And that too is something else we've all heard. We can see it, but we can't say it. So up in my head, I was thinking, because I was alone, my kids were all grown. My wife had to go back to work. I was the only one was without a job. And again, I did not know that everything I was doing was therapeutic. And I didn't mention that 3 months before my stroke, I had open heart surgery, quadruple bypass, and aortic valve replacement. 3 months later, I had the stroke. So likely I got it from a clot that spun out while they were still repairing my body. But that was the beginning of coming to realize that was the case. So as I was thinking my way through this, while walking, unable to express to anybody, but up here you can still remember, right? So I started remembering metaphorical stories that I was figuring out. I said, oh, I can actually see those words. I can actually see them. They were here in a marquee of words that I couldn't say. And I said, how can I get there? It's always a burning bridge between here and what I need to get to. That's the way it felt to me. When I was little, we went to Gettysburg for the Civil War, and I always had images of burning bridges and terrible things that were always on the other side of a field or a river. And while looking at those words, as I thought my way through it, I could see them far away. But and then I say, okay, I can't get to it. I'll work on this tomorrow. And it turns out that every tomorrow I could see that word coming closer. And I was looking across the river, looking for a place where I could step over, looking for the headwaters of that river. So as I did that over months and saw the word was coming closer, one day I woke up, as it were, up here in my head, and I found myself on the other side of the river. That word was right there next to me, and I could now express what I couldn't express before. And even though it's metaphorically, what I mentioned before, you are building bridges of thousands of miles of fiber, dendrites, and synapses, and you don't come to realize it until you finally make the connection. But progress has been made because you're still, quote, building the infrastructure, not yet able to walk across it. So metaphorically, that is what took me all that time. And it shouldn't, I will say it doesn't have to be that everybody has to spend 4 years trying to figure this out if you happen to have all these things, right? All these additional tools earlier in your life. If you give some of those tools already that are already packaged, as it were, with this book and other things that I worked on. And that happens to be that little story of the burning bridges and how I got across that river.
That story, takes me to the next question. What I really want to, there are a lot of persons with aphasia in our group, in our support group. So as caregivers and both as persons with aphasia, we want to know your journey of speech recovery and what were there different stages, like first word, then sentence, then paragraph. How was your journey of speech recovery in particular?
Well, I'm sure you've heard it in your country too. The therapists here talk about the 5 rules of aphasia recovery. And the 5 rules are: 1, motivation, obviously. Although whatever it might be, whether it's that you have other kinds of health issues, motivation is a large component of everything that happens. So you have to be motivated. And number 2 is practice. Of course, practice. The 10 principles of plasticity, repetition is among the 10. So motivation, practice. Number 3, practice. Number 4, practice. Number 5, practice. So that's how they describe it. And I absolutely believe it. As I've come to understand the principles of plasticity and scientifically how they are translated into the repetitive, persistent regular, intensive activities, and it's always the activities, because it really is not unlike photosynthesis, where you convert light into green leaves, right? Plasticity converts thought and cognitive activities into neuromatter, metaphorically building the branches and leaves of photosynthesis. But when it's cloudy and you block the sun, you get less photosynthesis. The same thing happens with plasticity. If you are more impoverished, you're not as enriched as you would like, there are less tools available to you because of your stroke or some other part of your life, then you will get, quote, less photosynthesis, less plasticity, because the clouds of people, humans, who are unfortunately interceded by all of these more or less ability to process with more activities, more regular persistent activities that bring about plasticity. So that is how it works, and that is how I found it out later. Again, I didn't know that along the way. I just happened to do all of the, what I call the doing. I did the doing without knowing that that is why it's so therapeutic. That's why we have groups today, because if you are really lucky, and I was really lucky, I had good insurance, I had 30 sessions with a therapist. I didn't realize that 30 sessions, 30 minutes each, that's 15 hours of therapy spread across 4 months. As good as I thought it wasn't till much, much later when I realized that, what am I going to do with the other 39 hours of the week when I only have one with a therapist? What should I do with the other 39 hours? If you're lucky, you live an enriched life already. You're a human, you do those things, you have to be motivated, but you actually have to use those 39 hours to your benefit. And either A, you do it because it's habit that drove you, or you have to be informed. You have to be educated about the reason why you need to do when you can't be with me, the therapist. And that is why groups are so helpful later, because otherwise a lot of people really don't want to know more about it. They just sit and watch TV and not do what they need to do, which is more engaged with what is another one of those action verbs that will then induce more plasticity, because you're engaged, because you're educated, because you are motivated. So that's really, I'll say sadly, people don't understand, if you do these things, and a lot of them have an emotional component, of course, they think, oh, you mean I'm going to get better because of this? I'm going to go, yeah. Why? Because if you don't, you won't basically process the raw materials, right? Because you do need the raw materials. You need a brain that'll actually work like photosynthesis. You do need the raw material to make that work. And it's not magic, although it sometimes feels that way, because they say, well, if you're not with a therapist, I can only get from the therapist. I go, no, you get it yourself based on who you are using these tools. Now I have to educate you now rather than wait for you to figure this out over the next 4 years, or maybe not at all because you choose not to, or you're not a good reader, any kinds of reasons. But I think everybody who is upright and walking have been motivated in their life. So all of us, the therapist, or others, people like you and me, who are no longer therapists, but it turns out we are still highly good at therapeutic work, then we help them understand, as we have understood, that if you do these particular things and you are always motivated, so tell me how you were motivated before, let us find a way to use the motivation you had before to now attack these issues that you now see for the first time, because now you are educated enough to do what has to be done. And again, I understand fully the severity of strokes, but I do have some of my friends who are mute, and they are in groups, and we play cards of different kinds of cards. And this one I'm thinking of, he was completely mute he had 1 or 2 words, but he was still winning games, right? So I said, oh, how does this work? So I wrote an article about it. I'll make sure I get it to you, because I said, oh, he sees everything that's happening in front of us. I was losing all the time because I'm not really good at cards. And as he got better, now he now can express about 200 words. It's going to take him a long time. I say that to him all the time. I said, you know it's going to take a long time. You understand that, right? And he goes, yes. But now he understands that he's on a trajectory that is incredibly slow, but he understands that slow isn't the end. Slow just means slow, right? So yes, it can be done. And I've seen it myself, as we all have, right? We all have. So.
No, indeed, absolutely. I think you are putting it very, very well, and your journey has been, I'm sure, a learning experience for you as well as for many of all the participants here. I'm just curious, sir, while Shruti comes in, roughly how much time did it take you? Because that's a question we are asked many times, even in the group. I mean, you speak wonderfully now. I cannot even imagine if I was to meet you on the street that there was a deficit and there was a stroke. So how much time from the event of the stroke did it take you to come to where you are now? And
right.
Do you still have, or do you feel that you still have some deficits?
Oh, I'll start with your last one first. Yes. Yes, I still have deficits. Over the years, so I still continue to write about it. So I'll say, unfortunately, everybody has to read all my work because to answer some of your questions, but I try to make my articles be on point of what you just asked. So some of my, what I call lingering deficits are a couple things. One, longer words or formal words, first names, last names, very hard time. On the phone, sometimes you say you give up, and I don't mean give up like I'm not motivated, but when I can't on the phone, and I'm calling about a vendor or whatever, they start going very quickly, and I have to tell them, no, you have to go slower. I'm a stroke with aphasia, and I really need it one digit at a time by phone. For some reason, I really have a hard time translating here to here on a phone. We're understanding here. One of my deficits is I have to listen hard to the accent of people in the United States, never mind people from overseas. But then I began to realize I can actually, it takes some amount of time, but we've talked two times, I can begin to understand your accent a little bit more so I can better understand. And then the same will happen if I continue to, quote, listen. But through this, it's much more difficult. And then there's a couple others too that I didn't even know I had the deficits until I happened to expose myself to this environment. And literally, it takes a longer story. There's at least one article, or the next time, literally, I had no idea that I could, quote, not do what I always thought I could do. Again, it came by a phone, and literally, people standing behind me. I was a volunteer at a hospital, and I was just starting, and I was there for 8 years, but it was my first time, and I was trying to get the information by phone, by a computer, and the guy behind me was practicing with me, he was keeping an eye on me, right? So literally, I was writing it down. Even I, who could write well, I couldn't come up with the letters I needed, so it looked awful. And the guy yelled at me. He says, "What the hell are you? Are you're mental? Are you, disabled? Why?" I said, "Shut up." He was a nice fellow. I said, "I got to figure this out." But I had to be put in that environment. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known I had that particular deficit too. So that's the first answers to some of your early ones. And I'll remember to send you some of you articles about that. You also see me when I'm speaking at organizations. I'll also ask the audience to tell me when they see what I call a stumble, a mental and verbal stumble. I ask the audience to notice that and quickly tell me or put up their hand so they can say, here's what you missed. I go, oh, thank you, because I get to get the feedback. But the fact that I get to tell people that I'm making these issues, then they listen harder to what I'm trying to speak. And that allows me to actually see my mistakes in the process of saying them. Even now, while we talking, I made a couple of very small stumbles. I could see them happening. They sort of get out of here and I have to go get them quickly and put them back and then get back to saying it properly. But again, that's how it looks. But otherwise, yes, I typically wouldn't know because I'm just talking. And if I do make mistakes and it's in normal conversation, they just think, oh, he's just old. And as you get older, you start to forget things. They don't realize there's a difference between forgetting because you're old or forgetting because you have aphasia. Now, Harvey, what was your first
And
question?
how much time it took you, Tom, from the date you discharged from the hospital to, where you are now, where you feel that,
Sure.
No,
Sure. It comes in, I'll say it comes in stages. I think it probably does, but unless you happen to have saved all the evidence of your life so that all of us could look at the evidence. So since I happen to have saved pictures, photographs, voice recordings, and written material, and you put all that together, it turns out to be a huge trove of information. Until you have all that, you really won't know what these stages might look like. So I really, on the one hand, I'll say, I really can't tell, but actually I can, because some of my friends, and we're all friends, once you have stroke and aphasia, we're all friends. I get to see them regularly, but not like seeing myself, but at least every month or two, I get to see them. And then I get to see, and I tell them that, and they go, oh, really? I really couldn't tell, because they don't write anything down. A lot of them don't. In my particular case, a couple things happened. One, for the first month after my stroke, I really couldn't know that today was today or tomorrow or last week. I had no idea. But because I was starting to take pictures, and you get this timestamp on your phone, right? Well, I didn't realize that. It took like a year before I got all those, and I put them in front of me with the time state. And I had already told my wife, oh, I took that yesterday. I thought it took it yesterday. Wasn't I look at the stamp time, I said, wow, that was 2 weeks ago. So that was the first stage, right? Of being able to, but William James says, specious memory, in the moment, can you understand what that was today or not? Today is Sunday. Well, back then I would say today is Tuesday. I wouldn't have known what time looked like. Then it came in stages. At 11 months of writing in my diary, thinking that everything looked fine the entire time. Of course, I was part of the experiment. I didn't show my wife or the therapist. They just knew I was, quote, doing something. At 11 months, while writing in my diary, I felt another click. I do believe that this was happening, and I finally hit that mother lode of being able now to express what I couldn't before. And 11 months, while writing in my diary, I felt the click. I looked at the first entry. I said, oh my God, this looks terrible. For 11 months, it looked fine. And quickly, it ends at book 1. It ends with 15 pages as fast as I could. I told the world that I could now see with new eyes at a higher altitude. I wrote all that down because that was that next stage, right? At 11 months, became fully aware. Then it took 2 more years to be able to write reasonably well, and 2 more years to be able to speak reasonably well. So 4 years when I was able to alter my my meal, at a restaurant that they wouldn't have been embarrassed by. And now every day, now it's 10 years. Yes, I still have those deficits, but I now know that if I practice, and if I tell you that I'm practicing, so I make mistakes, I want you to tell me, because then I hear the feedback, then I can get better the next time. And it comes back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So here it is 10 years, and people continue in my audience. They'll come up after, they say, have you stopped practicing? Have you stopped your therapy? Because, you look pretty good. And I say, well, isn't this practice just by having this conversation? And they go, oh, yeah. I said, so don't use the word practice, just live your life as well as you can, but now more consciously, purposefully about the fact that, yes, you had this terrible thing. And yes, you are, quote, getting better. And if you can, don't have to tell everybody, but you have to know that if you continue to do that, then you will get the feedback you need, which is why I do tell people and wrote an article about it. Please tell me the mistakes I'm making. Because then you get the feedback that you otherwise can't get from your therapist or your family, who will say, how's Tom? Oh, he's fine. No, don't tell me that. Otherwise, I won't know. So yes, that's how it worked. Yeah.
Absolutely. Fine. And during these 4 years, you were continuously taking the help of a speech pathologist, or after some time you stopped therapy and did, efforts on your own?
Oh, on my own. There was no other therapist.
Okay.
That was when I went to volunteer at this hospital, I wanted to volunteer there because they had a volunteer who had stroke and aphasia. And I said, I just want to see this guy. I want to, whatever he was doing, I want to do what he was doing. So when I got there, because I was in Boston and we were moving to Florida. And when I got there, that fellow had left. Never could find him again after that. And they said, okay, you can't do his job, but here's some other jobs. And I ended up doing those jobs. And once I thought I was comfortable, then I started telling my other peers, volunteers, who did not know I had stroke and aphasia, and including my partner. And then I started to explain to them how I couldn't talk before. Then I said, okay, now I'm comfortable. They always want speakers like we all do here. But this is years ago with volunteers, what are they going to do? Throw tomatoes at me? I said, I want to have make a presentation with our group so I can explain it to them, knowing that that was practice for me. But no, I didn't see any therapist until I had the TPAs. I had 2 of them while I was at that hospital. Later, 4 years later, literally by then I knew the SLPs because I was a volunteer. They showed up at my bed and they said, Tom, what happened to you? You already had your stroke, you had aphasia, now you're having TIAs. This isn't good. This isn't good. But I didn't have aphasia. I asked for a tablet and I started writing on it. It was wildly off the page and off the lines, but I could still see that I was writing words that made sense. So I said, okay, I don't have aphasia. Clearly, I just have physical issues and I had to get better. And that took about a month with the TIA.
So
that was it.
TIA, you had a TIAs after 4 years after your major stroke again.
Right.
Am I understanding you correctly? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So you went to the hospital and they gave you some medications at that time, and
no medication either. With TIA, you typically can't use TPA. It'll often will make it more difficult for you. So a TIA is usually within an hour up to 24 hours. And even when they came to get me at the house, because we were just coming back from a major traveling trip talking about aphasia. So Laura was right 2 feet away from me. And I thought there was a stumble. I thought, oh, that was a stumble. I made one more step and I could feel darkness descending in my head. And I said, oh boy. And I had one word before I couldn't say anything. I said one word. I said, trouble. And Laura turned around and I sat down and she said, are you having a stroke? I thought, And she called 911. And by the time they got there, 15, 20 minutes later, I was still awake. I didn't, it's not my first one. So I was still awake. She said, "Are you doing okay?" I said, "Uh-huh." And I could still move. And when they came, they said, "Can you walk?" I said, "Uh-huh." So they walked me to the ambulance, took me there. By then they assessed me as TIA. Of course, by then I was saying, "I want TPA." And they said, "No, no, no." So I went past the time deadline. And by then I was getting better through the evening and through the night. And by then I knew what TPA was. And I said, "Okay, that's what happened." And sure enough, I had my neck arteries were completely clogged. So I had the operation a day or two later for one and a month later for the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we are almost at 8. Shruti, I will pass it back to you, but we are at about 8, and then we'll open it up to questions after some time. Shruti, take it from here. Shruti, we cannot hear you. Unmute yourself.
You said practice, practice, practice. So my husband is asking, apart from your rest, you practice throughout the day? He's asking.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
How are you? Fine. How about you?
How are you?
Hi. How about you?
Fine.
Fine.
When was your stroke?
Okay.
When was your stroke? When?
4 years
4
Back.
years.
back.
Wow.
Back.
How are you doing?
Okay. How about you? How about you?
Practice every day.
How do?
Do you do, what's your name again? Jim?
What's your name?
Guru Raj. Guru Raj.
Ah, do you have a therapist, or do you practice on your own?
Shruti.
Do you have a therapist?
No. Shruti have
Therapist.
wait.
He says wife is taking care.
Yeah. And how do your hands and legs work?
Hands and legs. No.
Ah. So that's the right hand?
Hmm.
And
Yeah. I know. It takes a long time.
I'm also seeing some questions in the chat box,
Yes.
Dr. Thomas. Maybe we can take them because we are already. If anyone has any other questions, please raise your hand and we will come to you. I'll just take.
Yeah.
Although they are more on aphasia, which we will certainly cover again with you, Doctor. We'll come back to you. Vibha is saying her husband Akshay had a stroke about 7 years back and manages to only talk one word at a time, which is not very clear. We have been to speech therapists. Pronunciation did not improve, but we gave up practice. What is the way to be motivated and improve towards building sentences? That is something that I also, a query I had in mind. In your case, Tom, as you yourself say, there's an inherent motivation. There's an inherent personality factor. You were doing things earlier. You were self-motivated. Many people may not have those kind of maybe personality factor even earlier. Like I'm happy with life as it is going. I go to office. I come back in the evening. I'm just happy. I don't want to exert myself anymore.
Mhm.
How do I get them? That's a very, difficult question I can imagine to answer. How do I get motivated when, faced with a situation like this? What is
Yeah.
your experience or your opinion on that?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Biba, for your comment. Because it's difficult. There's no doubt about it. There's no silver bullet, as the therapist will tell everybody, and there really isn't, other than being motivated and having an environment, usually the family, that are loving and embracing the folks as they find their way to what that motivation, if there was ever a pill, the motivation pill might look like. Step by step, but it really only comes from the stimulus. One of the great scientists that she has written about, she'll be one of my scientists in my next book, is all about the excuse me, the stimulus. Sorry. And the stimulus really is the practice of reading, writing, and speaking, or other things, because they have these new machines, these AAC machines that are helpful. And to the degree that those machines help compensate for your inability to communicate, on the one hand, that's very, very helpful. Believe it or not, on the other hand, the compensation effort, because you have to, quote, learn the machine. They make the machine as easy as they can, but you still have to learn things. Believe it or not, the compensation, which is meant really to avoid having to do those things you can't otherwise do, so it provides that information for you. Believe it or not, it still is more than compensation. It is still therapeutic, because you're learning how that works. And as a result of doing that, you start to find more words that you couldn't say before. And you go, oh my God, they used to think, I say they used to, these days, because of the way science works and humans work, we used to, and that was like yesterday, certainly a year or two ago with the apps that they have. I said, oh, that's really if you're just really, really in trouble. And yes, we'll give you the apps. Now there'll be more compensation as a result of what they can do on your behalf, not realizing that when you do those activities on your behalf, it turns out that on your behalf is what the brain takes with what it's now hearing, and it starts using that to build more dendrites and synapses. So it could be, in your case, that if it's too difficult or just too despairing to think about it with practice itself, if you don't have those AACs, some of these devices, realizing that on the one hand, this can help me do my day-to-day life because of that, but also realizing if you do that, it will also help you get better until you find out it is possible that you don't have to, well, you won't use the exact same activities in the app, because now you can do it yourself, because it is that is the therapeutic intervention that app happens to be. It isn't just for the compensation, it's actually therapeutic as well. So yes, I'll stay with that. Say, let's go with that. And then we keep talking and make sure that your husband is in the room, which is to say, hopefully he's there with us now, because then he can hear from all of us, not just me.
Yes.
That all of us share those stories, and they turn out to be therapeutic as well, sharing what we've seen before.
Absolutely. I think sharing in a group is a therapeutic, and that is indeed what we strive for here every time we meet. One is, of course, learning from people such as yourselves. Another is, of course, interacting amongst ourselves. As you said, yes, AAC devices, although I'm not very sure how active or how prevalent they are in India, maybe Maybe Shruti has something to say there. Shruti, what about AAC devices? Because you do a lot of research. Are there India-specific AAC, assistive augmented?
We have downloadable on our mobile phones where language preferences can be chosen. Like I had mentioned in our communication practice session, there's a Jello app. I'll just put it in the chat box. There's a Jello app. There are apps, few apps which are available in India, which are tailor-made to Indian languages.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, see, that is, of course, one issue that we did talk about a little bit yesterday also, Tom. Given that we have a plethora of languages also, that is another issue. But yes, that is something certainly to be taken, and that is a challenge that we have in India that we struggle with. Okay, anyone wants to ask anything, they can raise their hands or we can take it further. Shruti, you want to say something?
Yes, I have a doubt. I don't know if I am right, but I have heard many people telling that as and when the right arm function improves, the person's speech will gradually improve. Have you seen any such thing happening with any other persons in your rehab center or anywhere in your city where the right arm improves and consequently the speech improves? Is it true?
So I'll ask it as another question. So you think that one modality impacts, improves the other modality as well, coming together? The if there was a room full of scientists and I said absolutely that's the case, I imagine some of them say, well, there's this, there's this, there's this, there's this, and I would be educated as a result of having a scientist talk about why that could be not what I would like it to be. However, the way the brain works, you don't just have one place that reads, one place that writes, one place that listens, one place that speaks. It is this incredible machine, and every time I say it, it's more than incredible, right? That the and I'll come back to that too and write that down, the syntax. That if you do and you happen to be better, so when you have stroke and aphasia, each of your modalities will be damaged differently, right? So it isn't like when you get assessed that your reading, writing, and speaking are always at the same level. That won't be. Some is here, some is here. They're all different, right? Based on who you were, how you used that modality before. So now they have these different levels. Now, how is it that one, let's say you're up here is good, this one here is bad, and this one's getting better? Do you think it doesn't affect this one down here? The answer has to be yes, because to speak means you're listening. To listen means you're speaking. To write it down means you're actually bringing in information from here. You continue to build them together without really knowing that you're building necessarily that versus this, because it's building the general reservoir of how those dendrites and synapses, really the synapses are this learning field, how they draw from that into any number of activities that need the fuel that comes from the messages, the information that comes from those synapses. So yes, I would say it absolutely is the same. Absolutely. If you were, I can't even imagine actually, if you are doing one thing and there isn't any additional improvement by the other thing, then I would say it's a different etiology. It's a different reason why you can't read, write, or speak in this particular thing while all the rest are going up and this stays the same. Then there's more than just the aphasia component of it, which could be part of it too. But yes.
Absolutely. I agree with you there, Tom. And in fact, I remember seeing some videos as on maybe some research done where the let's say the vision center was dead, but after some experimenting, after some training, some centers nearby took over that job, and the person started seeing a little bit again. So I'm just trying to visualize that as a layman, because the brain is not compartmentalized and they're not really isolated from one another. Everything connects to one another. It's just such a complex thing. So I would imagine, like if I'm raising my right arm, a region close to the right arm's region perhaps impacts some other functions. So as the cells or the synapses near that center grow, I would imagine that abilities which are controlled by those nearby synapses or cells would also come back. And in fact, there are very, very interesting, researches and videos that one sees where entirely, even after 20 years of isolation, the centers, they get activated again. And now we are talking of, as you yourself said, starting from thought. The very thought itself is making changes in your brain. In fact, we have had people on our sessions, people with Lockman syndrome, for example. They could not move a muscle, but continuous imagination, continuous strong focus, again and again, gave them the ability. Now, Brisa, for example, we have a session on Brisa from US. She suffered a locked-in syndrome and now she has recovered wonderfully. So I can understand that. I think we are past 8:20. We can close the meeting, Shruti and others. And thank you very much for your time, Tom. It was wonderful having you. And of course, we look forward to having you again and again. I'm looking forward to that, along with your articles, along with your book, and maybe if you permit, we would maybe translate some into the local languages, into Hindi or to Tamil, etc., just so that we can reach more of a specific audience. And I look forward to that. So should we close the meeting?
Thank you very much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate seeing everybody and hearing everybody's stories. I really do. Thank you very much.
Hardeep ji, I would request one more session with Dr. Thomas.
Yes, certainly. No, we will have him. We'll have him many times.
Yes, at least one more, if not 10 more.
Yes.
Absolutely. I do agree.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Yes, we look forward to that, really. So thank you very much again, Dr. Thomas. And
I have one more thing too. If you are interested, I should put it here, is my email is here. And because if you are interested, you can, everybody can send an email to me. I'll put you on my list. You get to see my articles and videos and books, and we can stay that way too.
Yeah, that will be wonderful. I will add myself. And as I said, we look forward to having you more, as well as the articles that you're talking about. It will be wonderful to share and to hear from you. So I'm in the meeting
with
now.
the time zone. Now I know the time zone, so now I can.
Now
I won't stay asleep all night, worried that I'm going to miss the time.
Yes. We are more in sync now. So thank you very much, Shruti. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Bye.
Closing the meeting now.
Bye.
Namaste.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you both.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.